Hi, good morning, everybody. So we're here today and we're going to discuss this upcoming vote, which will take place on Tuesday, I think, November 13th, about how taxes could possibly change for business owners and for accountants who would be filing taxes. So, Marianne?
Good morning, y'all. I'm Marianne Miller with StayLocal. We are queued up for the statewide election, which is Saturday. November 13th. And so this amendment that we'll discuss today, Amendment 1, is one of 4 fiscal amendments that that voters statewide are going to be looking at. StayLocal is Greater New Orleans Independent Business Alliance, and we're happy to present today along this information alongside LCI Workers' Comp. So thanks, Emily. StayLocal creates an environment for local businesses to thrive through advocacy, research, and education, and we are member supported. And so for our members to have the best information they can in order to make a educated choice about this vote, because it involves sales taxes, we thought we'd welcome some folks we have met along the way this morning. Julie Stokes is CFO of Stokes & Associates, where she provides the financial leadership that has grown her company from 2 employees in 1998 to well over 30 employees today. Stokes & Associates was recognized in 2020 as one of UNO's top 25 alumni-owned businesses. She's a CPA, nonpartisan policy advocate, civic leader, and a speaker. And over her 7 years of service to the Louisiana legislature, Julie gained a reputation as a passionate advocate for comprehensive nonpartisan fiscal policy. So obviously very well versed on what we're going to be talking about today. Julie's also the founder of Elevate Louisiana and co-founder of the Cancer Advocacy Group of Louisiana. Julie will speak first, but I'm going to let everyone know about our second speaker as well, since we're rounding up this morning. Barry Erwin is a Louisiana native who has led a council for a Better Louisiana since 2001. More than 30 years experience in public affairs and policy and in the political arenas. Prior to joining Council for Better Louisiana, Mr. Erwin spent 15 years as a broadcast journalist, working for media outlets from Shreveport to Baton Rouge and covering state government and politics, and assigned to Capitol coverage. He's active in the Baton Rouge community and has served on the board of directors of Baton Rouge Youth, and is past president of the ARC of Baton Rouge, really important organization. So thank you both for being here today. Welcome, and Julie, please start your presentation. We look forward to it.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be with you guys today. I have a little slideshow that I put together. I'm going to go ahead and share that to kind of just get us kicked off. Whenever I try to share it as a presentation, it always takes over my screen. It drives me a little crazy. So I'm going to share it in this environment for today, which is close enough, I think. You know, like Marianne said, and thank you for those kind words, I served in the Louisiana legislature for 7 years, and I landed there right at the moment when, if you remember, Bobby Jindal was pitching a big tax reform, a tax swap to get rid of the state's income tax and replace it with additional sales tax. And in the course of all of that, got really interested in tax reform, since it was my very first meeting ever was the rollout of that plan. And followed that passion for many years, as my background is I'm a CPA, and have always had a tremendous amount of enthusiasm about tax policy. starting back in 2003, if anybody remembers, because that was pretty busy time in Louisiana. And here we are again. We had some big tax ballot items on the, on the ballot, tax items on the ballot. And, it was really a time that shaped a lot of Louisiana. And I think this has the ability to do the same thing in a very positive way. So just talk a little bit about why we want to do something with our tax environment. I mean, when you look at it right now, Louisiana is our overall rank is 42nd. A big chunk of the problem there is in sales tax. You can see our 49th ranking in sales tax. And a couple of years ago, we were ranked 50th. And my running joke was always that we could easily be like 60th, 70th, 80th if they put certain third world countries between us and the next lowest state. It was so bad. We had multiple rates in effect for multiple time periods. You had to have, there was a, I don't know, like 30-page Excel spreadsheet that people were being asked to refer to on whether or not what they were selling or the services they were selling, even at that time, even some not-for-profit club dues were taxable. It was what we would call in accounting world a hot mess. It was not a pretty thing at all. So, we looked at that and thought that into that, let's bring something for sales tax. When in the end of 2015, the state was already seeing some pretty bad times, and we had a new governor take over in 2016, and the times even got worse because the price of oil plummeted to in the $20s per barrel, and it was quite a big problem for us. And so we were trying to figure out how do we solve these problems and implement tax reform at the same time. I formed what was called the Sales Tax Streamlining and Modernization Commission, where we talked about the fact that Louisiana has decentralized sales tax collection. And that's what you'll see right there in that current map. You'll see that 49th ranking and being 49th was largely because of what's called that decentralized sales tax collection. There are very few other states that have this. As a matter of fact, there's only 2 others because it's generally considered a really bad idea to force businesses into a box of having to go to every parish's tax collector and the state tax collector as well. So whereas most states collect tax at the state level and remit it at the county level, we collect it at the state level and also at the parish level. And you can see that our current tax system as such is the Louisiana Department of Revenue. You have the local collectors, which are also made up of a lot of different taxing jurisdictions. In one of my last years in the legislature, I probably gather, I think it was 2018, probably, maybe 17. I did some legislation to form these last 2 commissions. The first is the Uniform Local Sales Tax Board. And the idea behind that was that we all knew that you were never going to get all these local governments to give up their interests, invest them in the state. So could we put local government representatives in and let them be the centralized sales tax collection body? And so that was made up of many members. There were a lot of appointees, but from the organizations that generally tend to be the collector in Louisiana. Like if you look in Jefferson Parish, we've got the sheriff. St. Charles Parish, we have the school board. Other parishes will hire somebody to do that function. And, then also it can be the police jury, which is another word, if you're not from a place that has a police jury, from another place that doesn't have a parish council. If you don't have a parish council, you have a police jury. So we put all of these guys together, and the municipal association, which is more or less if you're a city or if you have a parish council, is what it seems like to me. But, we put all these folks together so that they could begin to formulate standard rules. Because if you can imagine that there's 64 or 65, and it really varies a little from that, sales tax collectors, that they all have a slightly different opinion on a lot of things. So, you might get something in the mail that says that you owe tax in Jefferson, and then get another thing in the mail that says you owe tax in St. Charles or Orleans. And you're like, gosh, this is helpful. How does this work? And back in the, I think in the 80s, in 82 or something, we did this big restructuring so that everybody would have uniform definitions. But even with the uniform definitions, everybody came away with different interpretations of those definitions. So whereas something might meet a definition in Jefferson where they say, oh, you owe the tax here, that other tax collector on that same issue might look at that and say, oh, no, we think you owe the tax in St. Charles. So trying to get those local opinions streamlined was a big emphasis there. And it was going to use private letter rulings to do that. It was, you could appeal it to the, still you could appeal it in court, but at least you had a free way to start that process. And also the goal of that group was to streamline multi-parish audits. Because if you think about it, you can get audited. I mean, you can hit the audit jackpot and get audited in as many parishes as you do business and by the state all at the same time, and just be living in, what we call audit hell, which is not a fun place to be. So that group was supposed to be, and wait, let me start that by saying that all of the groups that were represented kind of came together to support this, with one outlier. The School Board Association did not want it. And it was kind of, there was a very select, very few small number of local tax collectors that really spurred that on. So they were against it. We used a small, tiny portion, honestly, of the vehicle sales tax that's collected to fund that ULSTB group. And they immediately took that to court and they won. So then it became an unfunded group. And I thought, oh goodness, here we go. But that just goes to show you the power of one group to really overturn something good. Because to me, I couldn't understand why any of the local government officials would necessarily want to beat it down, because this was a pathway to having centralized collection, which you really got the feeling was going to happen eventually, without it being the state in control of it. So I think in a lot of ways, even though it worked somewhat and it didn't work because of that funding mechanism argument, that it kind of paved the way. It set up, that same legislation also set up the Remote Sales Tax Commission. And so what that group did is plenty structurally like what our proposed group is going to do. It put local representatives and state level representatives all at the table to come up with a uniform system for collecting those remote taxes. Now, those remote taxes were all based on 8%. Well, I think it changed after we changed our to 4.25. Yeah, 4.25. It really felt like it could go to 4.22 or 23, because it felt like we were going to keep going to session on how many pennies that we would have for that final penny. But, we put them all in this group so that they could come up with a standard collection portal, basically. And that they would just collect the amount for locals. Every local would get the same, whether their local sales tax rate was 3.5 or whether or not it was 5, with no regard to that. So I think some of that is what brings the locals to the table. Then the next thing that brings the locals to the table is that in 2018, 19, I need help, Mary. Well, you get out the legislature and it's all a blur. But I know that in one of those years, all of a sudden at the end of session, in a very dramatic fashion, the United States Supreme Court made a decision in the Wayfair case. And in the Wayfair case, basically they said, we're going to allow nexus, or your requirement to pay sales tax in a state, be governed by doing business in that state. And when they did that, it set off a tidal wave of the feeling like, uh-oh, we better do something here, guys. It became obvious that Wayfair had also put, things into Wayfair, into that decision that said that you couldn't be an undue burden on business. And certainly the sales tax, the Remote Sellers Board really didn't even gear up until after Wayfair passed, because you weren't going to need it, because that wasn't how life was going to work. Well, the minute Wayfair passed, and it passed right after we did that, all of a sudden you needed this uniform, or this remote sales tax commission, to make remittance uniform. So the new system that we set up, well, let me say one more thing about what I just said, which was that the burden of the unfair burden on business, that is something that any state, I mean, any company could take us to court on whenever they really wanted to. They could throw out our unduly difficult sales tax regime anytime they really wanted to, especially if they had a few of them, or a big association. So it really puts the whole thing in jeopardy. And that's another part of the reason why we wanted to do the Louisiana Sales Tax State and Local Streamlined Sales and Use Tax Commission. So what that means is that we're going to have several appointees. Louisiana Department of Revenue is going to have an appointee. The School Boards Association will have an appointee. The Municipal Association, the Police Jury Association, and the LMA. I think that's supposed to be LMA, isn't it, Barry? See LSA on there? Look, that's actually not my slide, but I'm pretty sure that's LMA. At any rate, the governor then gets an appointee, the speaker gets an appointee, and the Senate president gets an appointee. And what you'll notice about that is that there's 8. Now, when I first saw 8, I'm like, that's crazy, because what are you always going to be locked in, a 4-4 debate? And that just seemed really dangerous, and like not something you would want to have happen. But what they've done is just about everything of any substance, if not everything, has to be passed by a 2/3 vote. So you're not talking about 4 people against 4 people. It's 6 people that are going to have to come together for a smart solution. Which means that even though, when you have a new governor, that governor can substantially be in charge of who his appointee is completely, but also the Louisiana Department of Revenue's appointee. And to some degree, the party in power, which right now and for the last many years has really been business, has been largely in power in the state capitol, in the House and Senate. So the speaker's going to, generally, we would believe at this point, appoint somebody that's going to be a pro-business. The Senate president's going to appoint someone that's going to be generally pro-business. So now you've got the governor, pro-business efforts, and you've got the local governments all together. I'm genuinely excited by the fact that they have to do a vote of 6. Because I've watched these parties in back doors and in front of audiences at commission meetings, watch them go at it, and it is not pretty. I really always thought that we'd be able to make the base uniform, which is a subject for another day, but the sales tax base uniform, long before we'd be able to do this. And because I thought politically nobody's going to let it happen. So the idea that they opt to all work together is very exciting, and it to me marks a really positive time for Louisiana. So what this is, the ballot language is going to read to authorize the legislature to provide the streamlined electronic filing, remittance, and collection within the group, and to provide for the following duties and responsibilities of the commission. The funding, I'm like, oh my gosh, they put following, but it's funding. So they're going to have to figure out how they're going to fund the commission. And so, they're not going to be able to have that necessarily struck down in the court of law unless it's a constitutional thing brought to the court. I think that might be the end, yeah, because I go on to those other ones here. So I think the moral of the story is that I really believed that there was absolutely no way this was going to happen. And we formed the Uniform Local Sales Tax Board to try to get to a position where we were offering people a chance at some uniformity in the interpretations. We don't need that anymore, because now we are going to do this. I think that this provides a really solid framework by having the 6 vote majority, and they will develop the plan to uniform sales tax to collect, uniformly. And I think honestly, increase our rankings tremendously. So it's an exciting time, and I'll turn it over to Barry because I ran out of things to say, and he's so good at this.
No, thanks, Julie. No, I think Julie did a great job really kind of explaining it in the context. I thought I would just make a couple of points real quickly at the end, and then we can kind of open it up for whatever y'all want. I thought one thing I would kind of mention a little bit is, where you have heard some opposition there. I mean, really, most people don't understand this, let's be honest. So all of us are trying to kind of explain it to the public at large so that they'll see kind of what we're talking about. It's not going to affect anybody's individual taxes. The taxes all stay the same. This is really about making it more efficient and easier for our businesses in Louisiana to do what we ask them to do anyway, and that is collect sales taxes on behalf of state and local government and remit those to those state and local governments. So this is just going to make it easier because it's the hardest to do in Louisiana than anywhere else in the world, just about, as Julie just mentioned. So I thought I'd mention, in terms of the opposition, you do hear some locally in some places. It's more in a little patchwork of things. I would say this proposal that we're looking at that's on the ballot was crafted together through a task force that worked, I'm so confused on the years, I guess it was last year that we served on, with business folks and with the local governing associations to kind of come up with this mechanism. So you had the Police Jury Association, the Sheriff's Association, the School Board Association, the Municipal Association. All those folks worked together to kind of come up with this sort of compromise approach. Now, that doesn't mean every single local governing body is supporting this, but what it does mean is that the associations themselves who worked on it are not opposed to it. So they are bringing this to the table as a good faith effort because they understand too, because of the Supreme Court ruling that Julie talked about in Wayfair, with the way the world is on with online retail, we've really got to change to make our system more efficient. And we do want to do it to serve our own local businesses. So one of the things that Julie mentioned was this 2/3 vote. And I think that's key because one of the concerns that local governments have is that somehow this is going to go to the state. The state's going to keep their money. They're not going to be able to get it back when they need it in a timely fashion. And I think this whole kind of structure, which is unusual, was created to try and take care of those concerns because with that 2/3 vote, with 2/3 vote of the commission itself, but also of the legislature to make any kind of changes that they need to make or to even set up additional framework, it's going to require a tremendous amount of consensus. You're not going to be able to do anything without consensus. So what this is going to do really is start that process of creating this commission. They're going to be looking basically at three things: for streamlined remittance and collection of these sales taxes and then distribution to the state and local governments, to be able to make policy advice to businesses, kind of like what Julie was talking about earlier, like you've got these different jurisdictions and people interpret things differently, kind of get some policy advice as to which direction to go so that the businesses are kind of protected in that regard. And then also she mentioned the audit function to try and streamline that way that the audits, so that you're not just constantly under audit by all these different things. Now, this body is going to have to figure out how to do that. This amendment doesn't solve that problem, but it, again, will create that process, hopefully, for consensus. And I do think from our perspective at Cables, this is something that's been really important in our state for a long time. This is not the solution to everything. This is really the beginning of what we hope will be a process that's going to lead us to where we should be in the second decade of the 21st century, where we can use technology and the efficiencies that we have to really help our businesses, in a streamlined fashion, remit these taxes and get them back to the local governments in a timely fashion, so that really it's a win for everybody. That's certainly our hope.
And Barry, you brought up a good point that LSA is the Louisiana Sheriff's Association. Oh. So I guess they didn't put LMA on it, and I really didn't realize, but yeah. And, another part of what Barry had just alluded to was the fact that there has been some pushback from some local or parish governments. And one of those, and I kind of understood the pushback after they did it. It was kind of foolish. really foolish to me, but in the bond commission. So state bond commission controls how funding through bonds, right? So finance funding is submitted to the cities and to the parishes as well. And in bond commission a couple of months ago, they made the decision to withhold funding from Orleans Parish on a few important projects because they did not like the way that, I think it was kind of because they didn't like the way COVID was being handled in Orleans Parish. And I thought, well, actually, I didn't think of it at first. At first, I just thought, but my second thought was, that is so foolish, because now you're kind of playing with giving them their money. And is this going to backfire? Because you have this big election coming up, and literally they're expecting over 20% of the vote to be from Orleans, because you got these big municipal elections occurring. So it was kind of really a shot in their foot. You know, they really shot themselves in the foot and created some, I think opposition where there may not have been any. To put some of that at rest, because I do get it, and I hear it from several of my members at Elevate. This commission, and first of all, the underlying legislation plainly sets out that the money that's collected, the funds that are collected, belong to the local government, to the parishes. So, I mean, right off the bat, that part should not be an issue, because there's no question about whose money it is. Where at the State Bond Commission, they have to prove it. They have to make it happen. They have the authority, and then it gets put over. This spells out plainly that it belongs to the local government. And also, the two-thirds rule in there. And then also the fact that to change anything with it, legislation, if they wanted to change anything, has to be done by 2/3 and a vote of the people. And even the statutory companion or the statutory pieces that don't have to go through the Constitution still have to have a 2/3 vote for most of them. So I feel like it's not as easy because of that, mostly because of that majority 6 vote on the board itself. I think that makes it fairly difficult, for them to play politics with this money. So I understand those concerns and feel like it does address that. And so.
Julie,
Yeah, I totally
thank you
agree.
for bringing that up. I did want to mention a question that has come in, and I wanted to pop it in now because I think it builds off of that, which is someone just had a simple question, which is, should the vote pass and the commission be established, will that commission be able to decide what sales tax rates are?
No.
Change rates.
No, not at all. That will still have to be done by a 2/3 majority in the House and Senate, because it's a tax rate bill. Now, I guess Barry could back me up here, but I think they can lower it. They just can't raise it. They can lower it by a majority, not the group, the legislature. The legislature can lower it by a majority, but they have to have a 2/3 vote to raise it. And Barry, if that, because I think that's right, but I'm not altogether
that's right.
It. Good.
No, this group has nothing to do with the rates. The rates are decided at the state level by the legislature by a 2/3 vote, and at the local level by a vote of the people. That will stay the same. So there's no change in that whatsoever. This is just about the way it's collected. It's a process.
Right. Great. And Emily, I know you're watching some other audiences, so pop in if I don't want to populate with all the questions, but another one more specifically to, I think when we had the slide up that actually says the language is really helpful, because this may be where this one came from this question popped up. It was, is it good practice to vote a commission into being without its source of funding already established? So I think in the actual language, when we go to vote and push the lever, there is a reference in there to the fact that it will have to find funding to operate. And so the question is just, is that a healthy approach? Is that normal to do that? To vote something in that still is yet to find its funding to govern itself?
I would say that's probably not an ideal way to do things. Again, although there is language in the amendment that says it will be funded by state and local government, I think the idea was like I believe with the remote sellers that Julie talked about, I think that's the one. It's kind of a split where so the state puts up the same amount out of its sales tax revenues, the locals do collectively too. I mean, really, honestly, for the locals, you're talking really a fraction of what they would collect. So it's, and let's be honest, they're also paying for collections to go on anyway. So there's kind of this misnomer that we're not already paying for the collection process. We are, they are, it's just a different mechanism. So, and we're really talking about a fraction. But I do think the reason it's not spelled out is because of this notion that bringing together people in compromise, one, you don't want to put every single thing in the Constitution. I mean, there's a lot in this amendment already that probably, you know, wouldn't go in the Constitution, except for the fact that people are so sensitive about, you know, getting this right and protecting things. So there is, you know, language that alludes to the state and local, you know, funding of it, number one. And number two, it does get back to what we were talking about. They're going to have to come to an agreement in advance of how they're going to fund it, or this thing will not exist. It will fall apart. So that's something the legislature will have to do prior to this group actually coming together. It's not ideal, probably in a lot of ways, but when you're doing compromise on really, you know, sticky issues, you know, that's sometimes what you see.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
And as I understand it, it happened very quickly, right? In terms of this past fiscal, between the fiscal session and coming to vote.
In terms of the passage of this amendment, you know, actually it was in ways it kind of came quickly. I mean, this thing has been, as Julie mentioned, simmering around for a long time. We just never could pull the trigger to get everything together. But I think what happened politically is the Speaker of the House and some of the leadership in the legislature really wanted to see this. And, you know, there's another tax measure on the ballot as well, to see some tax reform happen during this session. And so there was a commission or a task force, another one that was created last year to kind of look at this. And that's kind of what brought everybody to the table. So on the one hand, this has been a long time in the making, but on the other hand, politically, it was kind of a tight window that the Speaker kind of created himself to try and push this forward. And so it came kind of quickly in some ways, but these issues have been around for quite a while.
Yeah, it really has. Like I said, it's been going on for a long time, and people don't always understand how much power the local government officials have with the legislature. You know, and local government was very determined that this wouldn't be a thing for a long, long time. It just loosened up after Wayfair, honestly. But, you know, when I operated the Sales Tax Streamlining Commission for probably 5 of the years I was in the legislature, or that, I guess 4. It was really like a lot harder work mentally to try to streamline the sales tax base and to try to figure out, like, and that's a complicated issue, but there's going to be a lot of give and take, you know, to make the revenues for local government stay the same when you're changing their exemptions and deductions and having to change overall, you know, exemptions from sales tax. But, you know, we really thought that was more politically possible, even though that would be a very, very, very difficult job, than ever getting this done. Because what you don't think about is that every one of your state reps and state senators, all politics is local, right? Those guys, if you go in there and you just buck your whole parish and you say, the heck with them, I'm doing centralized sales tax collection, the retaliation that will come to you in your parish is very, very strong. And a lot of, like, sheriffs have a lot of power, and parish presidents have a lot of power. All these people have a lot of power to destroy, I mean, to lift up as well, but also to destroy. so it would be very difficult to pass something like that, because you'd have had to have somebody that was so pro-business that they were willing to not be concerned about the retaliation locally. And that might cost them their seat in the legislature. So, you know, the fact that Wayfair, in a big way, pushed everybody to come together and find some common ground, it is really, seriously, it is a big deal here. So it's pretty exciting in that.
So if anyone's joining and didn't know what we were referring back to, so I looked at it's 2018, Julie, was the Supreme Court case that you're talking about. You said 2019,
Thank you.
very close. No, not at all. And I did just want to give a chance to ask, there was another topic. I didn't cut and paste it over. What I will say though, is when we're talking about the broader change that brought this, when we're referring to a Supreme Court case, another thing that it's important to remember, it's something that StayLocal worked on. I know all y'all worked on. We had other partners, Louisiana Retailers Association. For years, we were a state that wasn't actually collecting the online sales tax that we should have. And that revenue was just out the door. So when you talk about reform, I mean, this has been a long time coming, but I think there's also an argument for just sales tax not even being collected at all was something that maybe had to be prioritized, because that was just completely unfair.
Well, yeah, and I mean, when you look back to a little pass through history, you look at when Jindal brought that plan to get rid of income tax and just have sales tax. The pushback from the locals was huge, and you're like, why do you care? They care because they already don't collect the kind of like balances in property tax that they would ordinarily in other states be collecting, because we've got that big homestead exemption. So our local governments are really very dependent, much more dependent than most other states on sales tax. So if the state sales tax of 4% was going to go up to it was high, like 6 or somewhere thereabouts. It's actually been a long enough time where that's in my back mirror a little bit, but that was a big deal to the local governments, because they're like, where are we going to have any leeway to ever have a local vote to increase sales tax at all? We can't do anything with property tax in a lot of ways right now, because a lot of our base is already taken up. And then even on the corporate side, we had a group, we still do, that can hand out exemptions to corporate property tax for industrial groups. And some of that control was handed back over to the locals. And if you think about it, anytime the local government wants to do any kind of tax increase, it has to go through the State Bond Commission and get approved. I mean, the local governments have a lot to be frustrated about, quite frankly. And they weren't about to give up more control. And there again, even when we did the Uniform Local Sales Tax Board, in a way, they don't want to give up more control. So just being able to do that, I thought was a big improvement. This would really modernize the way we do things. One of the things that when I ran that commission, and we were having a day where we just talked about centralized sales tax, we had the people from JCPenney come to the commission, not just the local JCPenney, but the national, the department that pays and remits all sales tax for JCPenney. When they came to us saying that they did business, and I think it was 49, but we're going to call it 50 for ease of math for a moment. If you do business in all 50 states, it should take 2% of your time to remit taxes in any of those states. In Louisiana, it took 21% of their time. And it's like, that's pretty telling that we can't keep going like this. We do make ourselves unattractive, and it is sort of a Stone Age way of running things. But at the same time, the locals, A, have power over the legislature, B, have had so much power and control taken away from them in this state that really kind of harnesses that power at the top, at the state level, that it was truly a battle coming together. And very exciting that we could even get to this, because I wouldn't have called it. Before Wayfair, I'd have said, you forget about it. I don't care if we're the last one standing. You're never going to get it, because not every state that's got the situation that we have has such tight state control as we do. So the locals are like, we've had enough. And somewhat understandably, they're pretty fairly well understandably.
And I did have one question from somebody. Will there be a new platform that the taxes will be collected on, like LATAP, or will it just be sending them to the same place?
I think that that's part of what was addressed in here. And I was actually going to share the text of the bill, but I'll let Barry, while I try to pull up the text of the bill real quick, if he's got something on that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably it will be actually a new platform, but a new platform that does the same thing that some of the platforms that we have out there, quite honestly, like the parish e-file, which is a thing, and like the remote seller piece. I would imagine that it's going to end up being very much like the remote seller piece. They will basically be combined into the same thing. So the remote sellers, the local sellers, there's no discrimination between whether you're in state or out state. It's out of state, it's going to be the same portal. But I would imagine it's going to be very similar to what the remote people do right now, which is a pretty easy, at least as I understand it, portal for putting it in there, and it figures out what the rate is by your GPS or wherever you are on that transaction.
Yeah. Let's see, desktop 2 is what I want. I'll share that for a second. So this is the bill. So all of this gets this tiny little synopsis that you'll see at the poll. But what the bill actually, it goes into the existing law that the state can levy in tax, that the local governments can levy in tax on sales tax. And then that the Constitution authorizes the political subdivisions to exercise the power of taxation, and also that the parishes requires that all the political subdivisions which levy tax within a parish. So if you recall, that's all those different taxing authorities that were under, like the school board, and all the different taxing authorities that are under a parish has to agree. So that you didn't actually have sales tax authorities in every, 8 of them in every parish, because that's a bigger problem. So the proposed constitutional amendment then provides for those appointees, like we talked about, with the School Boards Association, the Municipal Association, and the Sheriff's Association, the Secretary of the Department of Revenue, the Governor, the House Speaker, the Senate President. And that the members will be appointed at the first meeting, and that they're going to have a chair and a vice chair that are going to rotate. They'll pick their chair and vice chair, and that they'll rotate. And that's pretty much all that says in there. That it will have its first meeting called by the House of Representatives no later than a year. And I suspect that it will possibly be sooner than that, because they are going to want to get that done. Provides that the commission shall provide for streamlined electronic filing, remittance, and collection. So that's that platform. They're going to have to get together and make a decision on what that platform is going to be. And that the money collected will be the property of that taxing authority. Then you go into requires the commission to issue the policy advice. So that's kind of like that role of what that uniform local sales tax board was going to be. We want them to develop rules, regulations, and guidance to centralize and streamline the audit process. So one of the things right now is that they didn't come up with this structure. So they didn't figure out how that they were going to work on this. And that's one of the things that I think is left open, that give some people some pause. But again, 6-8, they're going to have this figured out. So that gives me reassurance. I got some reassurance when my own sheriff, Joe Lapinto, he decided that he was not going to oppose the legislation. And I don't know, Joe, if he's supporting it or if he's just not opposing it, but he's definitely staying out of the way. And that came to pass when they decided that they wouldn't take over the audit function. A lot of these sheriffs and all these organizations, they make a substantial amount of their operating money by being the collector. So if you take the audit function away from them, you kind of have a lot more politics and financial fight, going on about how to handle this. So then it would be funded by state and local and use tax revenues. So sales and use tax revenues. So it's going to come from both sources. And they're going to have to figure that out, which is, again, another ellipsis question mark in the scheme of how it's going to be done. But 6-8 gives me some confidence. For 1 year following it, in 1 year, the Uniform Local Sales Tax Board and the remote sellers would be abolished because you don't need it anymore. That it puts the powers, duties, and functions and responsibilities of these entities would be transferred to the commission. Let's see if there's anything else. That adoption or amendment of any of the administrative rules of the commission would take 2/3. That 2/3 vote of the legislature to enact all statutory provisions relative to the duties, funding, or obligation of the commission. That can't be understated, because the local governments do have a lot of power, and in a very pro-business legislature, 2/3 is important, because you easily have a majority that would run roughshod over the process possibly. So 2/3 will ensure that everybody has to be heard. And the constitutional amendment also provides that absent the enactment of statutory provisions, local sales and use tax collection shall be provided for in the existing constitution. So if they don't do anything, which I consider to be highly unlikely, then it will just be carried out in existing law, which means that everybody can audit without any hindrance upon that ability to have as many audits as they want generally. I don't think that's going to happen, and it wouldn't be good for any of us if it did. But yeah, so everything's going to take 2/3 vote, and you know, the ballot language really takes all of that and tries to put it into 2 or 3 sentences. But I thought since we had an extra moment or two that I could share that with you, and I could probably give you the link too for anybody who wants to go check that out. I'll put it in the chat. If I can find the chat.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That is a practice I hope to adopt for many things going forward before we vote, right? We just sort of don't give ourselves that time. That's really helpful. I'm going to copy that. Well, would y'all like to cover anything we haven't covered yet? Is there anything you want to say before we wrap up that we missed?
I would just say, you know, for most voters individually, they may look at this and say, what's the point? You know, a lot of voters look at anything on a ballot with an amendment and say, if it doesn't impact me and I don't totally understand it, then I'm just going to vote no. But what I would say is this is something that we have been working on for a very long time. It's an opportunity where really the local government and the business interests came together with a proposal that, again, may not have universal support, but at least it doesn't really have much in the way of opposition. It's more of a statement to say, yes, we've started working together to solve this problem. And if we pass this amendment, we're going to continue to do that. And we've also set a pretty high bar of, you know, of collaboration and working together to make this happen. So this is not going to solve all the problems that we have in the world when it comes to sales tax and sales tax administration. We have a lot, but this starts the ball rolling. It's the first step in doing something that would be really significant for our businesses and for our business climate. I mean, there's no point, you know, in overall. Now we have a high sales tax, but we have basically in our state a pretty low tax burden in general. There's no point in having a low tax burden if we also have a bad tax climate. And this is one of those things that contributes to the tax climate being bad because it's so inefficient, it's so difficult, and that type of thing. So this is a step towards improving that climate for not changing our taxes, but just making it work more efficiently and more effectively for our state businesses, our in-state local folks. And, you know, I think to Julie's point, I'd say lastly, I think there are enough safeguards really and truly that have been put in here to protect those concerns that local governments legitimately have. I mean, we pay our local taxes to the local governments to do local things. There's no reason any of us would not want those local dollars to stay at the local level. And so I think there are enough areas in here that ensure that. And the last thing I'd say on that front is virtually every other state does this and it works just fine and it's not an issue. And if they can do it and make sure those local dollars go to the local governments, we can do that in Louisiana too.
Yeah, and you know, I want to show a map because I want people, I would like to see, let me, I'm gonna just see if I can share this with you guys real quick on this other screen so you're not subject to all of my notifications coming in. Good grief. I don't know what do not disturb is for sometimes, but let me go ahead and share. And I am not exactly sure why I cannot find a 2022 version of this yet, but this is what the Tax Foundation puts out as Tax Freedom Day. And so it measures how many days you work in your state to pay off your tax liability. And you will see that despite the fact that Texas doesn't have a individual income tax, and despite the fact that we have this outrageously high sales tax compared to most states because of the homestead exemption, because underlying property tax is so low that sales tax has to take the burden in our local governments. But the tax freedom day in Louisiana is actually very low. For most of the years I was in the legislature, we were not the third earliest tax freedom day. We were the earliest tax freedom day in the country. So I want to give people just that sense, because there's a lot of rhetoric out there and people can take and seize upon high rates and say, we've got the highest taxes in the country. Simply not true. Because our balance of taxes heavily weights towards sales tax. That's, but I always like for people to understand that, because it is something that never gets talked about. And just like to spread that little fact whenever I can. So.
Thank you so much. And it's always good to end on a good note, right?
Yeah.
This is a positive way to think about things that I hadn't thought before. I appreciate that. Well, Julie Berry, thank you so much for giving your time this morning. Folks who want to or need to ask for follow-up question or repeat anything, please either reach out to Emily or myself, Emily at LCIWC, or Marianne at StayLocal.org.
Well, it's been a real pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, and great to get to know you guys a little bit better and share with everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. Appreciate it, and good luck.
Just remember, November 13th, vote. Thanks, bye.